Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third installment on the training on the induction booklet. Today we'll be looking at punctuation. So in terms of punctuation, the first thing we need to look at is conjunctions and interjections. Here at Base Transcript, you are allowed to start a sentence with a conjunction. So if the speaker starts by saying, well, because this and this and that, you are allowed to use because as your first word because that's what the speaker says. So essentially, although we follow rules of the formal rules of writing, it is still dependent on what the speaker says. We are still controlled by what the speaker themselves says. And if they start their sentence with a conjunction, well, there's nothing we can do but just to transcribe the conjunction. If the speaker ends their sentence with a conjunction, we offset the conjunction with a comma, and then if it was a statement, we end with a full stop, and if it was a question that was being asked and ended in a conjunction, then we put a comma and we put a question mark at the end. So if the speaker was saying something and they ended with so or but, and that's where they ended and they didn't carry on, then you just offset the conjunction with a comma and you put a full stop if it was a statement, or a question mark if the sentence was actually a question. For interjections, we always put a comma after the interjection. So if the speaker says, oh, I didn't know, after the O, you put a comma and then you carry on with the rest of the sentence. I didn't know, full stop. So that's how we deal with any interjections. These are just a few examples of interjections. We offset it with a comma and then we carry on with the rest of the sentence. We don't just ignore it or just put it in the sentence. We put a comma after it. So when you're using a comma in a sentence, you do not separate the subject from the verb in the sentence, nor do you separate the dependent clause from the rest of the sentence. So, for example, this sentence, this part, although they require so much energy, wouldn't mean anything on its own. So it's a dependent clause. Therefore, you cannot separate it from the rest of the sentence with this comma. It is illegal to do so. You write the sentence as it is without a comma. This is the correct way to use to actually state the sentence without separating a dependent clause from the rest of its sentence. We never use a comma after a conjunction unless you are offsetting a dependent clause, in which case you use a double comma situation, meaning you put a comma before the clause and after the clause because you are offsetting the clause from the rest of the sentence that can stand on its own. We also use a comma before a conjunction when the conjunction is joining two independent clauses, which means two complete sentences that can stand on their own. All the time, when a conjunction joins two sentences that can stand on their own, you put a comma before that conjunction. However, if the sentence is shorter than 10 words, there is no need for the comma. So, you do not join complete sentences with just a comma. If there's no conjunction between the two independent clauses, then you don't put a comma to join them. For example, these are separate sentences. You do not join them with a comma. So for example, if somebody said this, you don't put a comma here and join these two independent clauses together. Why? Because the sentences make sense on their own, they can stand on their own, therefore you just put a full stop after each sentence. There's no conjunction between these sentences, so there's no need for a comma, there's no need to join the sentences. We also make use of the Oxford comma here at Best Transcript. So an Oxford comma is this situation where you are listing things and then before the last item you put a comma before the and or the or list that you're listing. So for example, these sentences, they don't need a comma anyway, because you're using and all the time, or to, or, then you don't put a comma. But in the case where it was just blue, pink, and red, then you would put a comma after blue and a comma after pink, just like in this case. But in the case where it's like this, you don't need a comma. Okay, quotation marks. You put quotation marks when somebody is quoting direct speech. Okay, here are examples, and you always, before you put your sentence and the before you put your quotation, you put a comma to offset it from the rest of the sentence. So these are two examples where you would use quotations, and notice here you put a comma after this sentence because the sentence is still carrying on. That's how and you put a comma here as well. So this is how you approach this type of thing when you hear it being spoken while you're transcribing. So if somebody actually says the punctuation, then you put the actual punctuation that they're dictating to you. So if they said quote unquote C-O-M full stop, you put the actual punctuation. So you put the dashes, you put the quotation marks, you put the full stop, and don't forget to offset with the comma because this is a quotation. So spoken punctuation must be written in the normal form of the punctuation. You don't leave it as it was said. In transcription, we use single dashes to offset a sentence that has been spoken within another sentence. This could be a question that was asked within another sentence, or just a statement that was made within another sentence. So we use these dashes. So it's a space, a dash, a space, and the sentence that is put inside the overall sentence. Then you put a space, and then you put a dash, and you put a space again. That's how you would transcribe something like this. But you only do this if the sentence inside the dash and the one outside the dash are both full sentences that can stand on their own. For example, this sentence can read, single dashes can be used to offset a sentence that is spoken within another sentence only if the sentence inside the dashes and the one outside the dashes are full sentences. This sentence inside here can also stand on its own. It can also just read, it should look like this. It's a full sentence, therefore you can use a dash. In the case where this sentence is not a full sentence, or this sentence outside is not a full sentence, then you cannot use these dashes. Then you would use commas to offset it. So if they are not complete sentences, then you cannot, it is illegal for you to use these. At best transcript, we do not use parentheses at all. I don't want to see anything in curved brackets. We do not use parentheses. Avoid using colons and semicolons as well. You can never include ellipses in the transcript, not at all. It is unacceptable. So in the case of colons and semicolons, I know there are cases where they are required, but those are usually very rare. So that's why I'm saying avoid using them, because they are only necessary in a very limited number of cases.